Welcome back. The stage is set for the first ever in-person Quad Summit. It is to take place shortly in White House. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga all set to attend this crucial Quad Summit. Now, this isn't a military grouping, is what almost every head of state or government and their representatives are quick to put out. They say whether it's battling the COVID-19 pandemic or strengthening economic ties or ensuring a resilient vaccine supply chain among countries, that is the top agenda. The first ever in-person meeting of Quad is also being seen, and this is where it becomes extremely crucial. Not that COVID-19 vaccines or climate change are not important, but an effort to tackle China's growing belligerence in the Indo-Pacific region. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or Quad, is a strategic dialogue between United States, India, Japan and Australia. And Adil Brar, ASEAN countries would be watching these images very, very closely. Philippines has given one indication, but other countries, should ASEAN come closer to this grouping, it would be a real nightmare for Beijing.
Yes, for sure. The ASEAN bloc is watching this. China's strategy in ASEAN is to divide and rule. They throw these goodies at the ASEAN countries and they want to get the allegiance from the ASEAN in return. But certain countries like Philippines are on the edge, and even Vietnam is kind of on the edge. They are not sure, if they should join the US entirely like the Quad countries have done. So China is trying to divide and rule the region as much as possible. And in certain topics like South China Sea issue, that's where they have the bigger concern around Chinese belligerence. And that's where the US gets the best of the whole discussion. And they are able to convince the countries that you should be concerned about China. But on trade side, they look at China, which is one of the biggest trading countries in the Asian region. So they want to tap into the opportunities that exist because of China. So they don't give up on that, but they also want to make sure China does not eat their lunch. So there's that hedging strategy going on.
It's extremely interesting you say that China throws goodies at these countries, but that is how China traps people in debt. Their debt trap diplomacy that you've written extensively about, Professor Brahmachalani. How will ASEAN view these images that are playing out on our television screens?
In question, ASEAN is a divided group with several of its member states beholden to China. Cambodia and Laos, for example, have very little leeway, the way they have hitched themselves to Beijing. Thailand, under military rule, is also pro-China. US policy is pushing Myanmar, India's important neighbor, into China's lap.
Professor Chelani, stay with me for a moment for the benefit of our viewers. These are live images that are coming in from White House. This is the Indian bloc that we see in our images. That is the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar. Right next to him is the National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, who's just, moved a little, perhaps to talk to Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, sitting right next to the National Security Advisor. And I think India's ambassador to the United States, Taranjit Sandhu, right next to him. So this is where the Indian officials and the External Affairs Minister, they're sitting right behind the Prime Minister would come in perhaps moments from now. Similarly, you'll have officials of every other Quad country. So this is the Indian bloc. Then you have Japan, Australia and the United States of America. There you see the Foreign Secretary and the National Security Advisor in touch with our officials in Washington, D.C. Professor Chelani, go on, sir.
Well, I think one important point that we should keep in mind is that Biden has a more nuanced approach to China than his predecessor, Donald Trump. Biden, for example, shies away from calling out China, as underscored by his UN speech. He gave a UN speech on Monday, and in that speech, Biden did not utter the word China even once, even as he named Iran, North Korea, and others. And unlike Trump's confrontational approach, Biden shies away from an overtly containment approach to China, even as there is an underlying continuity in the China policy inherited from Trump. So there are important nuanced differences. And in some respects,
Okay.
Biden is in fact seeking not to antagonize China.
And isn't
He
that
has
what
taken a-
China is hoping for? That this grouping will not succeed. Adil Brar, that perhaps the reason why Zhao Lijian, the Chinese spokesperson, or commentary that comes from Beijing and commentators in China says that this is a grouping that is, one, very small, two, Cold War mindset, and three, set to fail because they don't have similar goals or same end game in mind.
Yeah, for sure. So they look at the domestic politics in India, in Japan, in Australia, in the US, and they look at how the domestic agenda often drives the foreign policy, which is not the case exactly in China. You know, the party decides which way China's foreign policy will move. And so in case of these countries, they look at their domestic concerns shaping foreign policy, and that is what gives China the confidence that at some point there might be a new government in China or in Japan or elsewhere, and that could shape the way they deal with China. And it's like a hope, to be honest. We don't know exactly if that will happen, but that's China's hope and their hedging strategy. And they try to amplify these messages and hope that, you know, the grouping fails on its own. And they look at the history of the group, and it actually fell apart in the past, and then it came together again. So that is what gives them the confidence it's not going to work out.
It fell apart because people were still hedging their bets. But Professor Chilani, when it comes to Australia, or when it comes to India, is there more clarity? Because both countries have seen how China acts. By China's actions in Ladakh or at Doklam, or what we are seeing opposite Arunachal Pradesh, there is now clarity. China wants to bully India, and that's exactly what it tried with Australia, of course, using the trade route there. So there is more clarity, and perhaps China has pushed India and Australia closer towards America and Japan and Quad.
Definitely, but there is one important point that we should bear in mind. India is on the front lines to counter Chinese expansionism. While US, Australia, Britain, the AUKUS partners are far from China. Even in the Quad, India is the only Quad member that shares a land border with China.
Yes.
Japan is a neighbor of China, but it's separated by a sea, fortunately.
Okay, and we are playing out these visuals full screen right now. The four heads of state and government, they're walking in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US President Joe Biden. You can see them in these images. Moments from now, perhaps we'll also hear and see Yoshihide Suga and Scott Morrison.
Well, let me